time I was kind of here for friends, and that's kind of what I try to teach the youth kids, is that it's good to be here and it's good for fellowship, but you also want to make sure that, if something happened tomorrow and every other youth wasn't here anymore, would you still be here? Are you here for the right reasons? And I was here one night, we were watching a video about the book of Revelation, and it was about the rapture. And I was watching it, and I kind of felt God tug on my heart and say, I need you to do something more. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew it was something big. At the time I thought God was calling me to preach, but I think God was just calling me to do something. Which, doesn't seem too out of place. God calls us all to share the message. Sometimes we just forget that. In the book of Matthew, God says to go forth and tell others. But, I felt it, and I really felt like I just heard God speak to me. The more I thought about it, the more it scared me. It was kind of a control issue. To me, it wasn't so much that God had called me to do something. It was that, at that age, I had plans for my own life. I didn't want to give up all my plans to do what God wanted me to do and to feel like I had no control over my life. I had things that I wanted to do, things that the world tells you is normal. I wanted to go to school, I wanted to go to college, I wanted to get a job. I wanted to be in control of what I wanted to do. I didn't want God to just tell me what to do for the rest of my life. And it really bothered me, so I started kind of trying to find excuses to not come to church because in my mind, and I think we all do this, even though as Christians we know that God's with us wherever we go, we think as long as we're not in this building, that God can't see us, or that God can't bother us. Yeah, I had a youth tell me one time we were over in the other building, and he said something or did something that I thought was goofy, and he said, well, it's okay because we're under concrete. God can't see you as long as you're in a concrete room. And it sounds silly, but we do the same thing. We think as long as I'm not in church, God can't bother me, and I thought that. So when I turned 18, my 18th birthday, I was still in high school and I moved out. Because I knew if I moved out, I'd kind of have my own freedom and wouldn't have to go anywhere, wouldn't have to feel that tug every time I was at church. Because every time I was there, I felt God saying, you're not doing something, you're missing out. So I gradually kind of went less and less and less. And before I knew it, I wasn't going at all. And I kind of put everything in the back of my mind, even though I still knew what I was supposed to do. I thought, I'm not at church, so God can't bother me. And I still had friends from the youth group that would come by and visit me time to time, tell me what was going on, come and invite me. And around that time, I met a little redhead named Marilee. And she kind of, even from the beginning, kind of kept me in line. And, we talked about church a lot, and we always discussed going to church, but to me I knew if I came back that I was going to get that same little poking feeling. Just wasn't ready for it. And was going to college, and I think I moved back home about that time, and was getting ready to get up and go to school one day, and Mom came upstairs and told me that Gary, a good friend of mine from youth, had been in an accident and been killed. And it just bothered me. I just couldn't understand, what God had in store for that, why that would happen. And it really hit me hard. And found out when the funeral and everything was going to be, and came up here to talk to Doug about it because I was having a rough time with it. And just talked to Doug, and he just asked me, where I was at, what was going on in my life, what I'd been doing. And I told him, one of the first questions he asked me was, do you remember that night when you come to me and told me that God had something in store for you? I said, yeah. He said, do you still think that's true? And my brain, in my mind, was going, yes, 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 and okay. I said, no. And he said, okay. And I started coming, and I was hanging out with it wasn't really youth anymore, but I started hanging out with the youth group just to, kind of go over memories of Gary and just things that had been happening. And it seemed like through that, I kind of started coming more and more, and Mary talked to me, she said, because we always decided, when we got married, we wanted to go to church. That was, we wanted to be a family that went to church. I just kind of put it off as long as I could. And we started coming more and more, and Doug asked me again, and he just would not give up on it. I said, maybe, but I don't know for sure. So I kind of started betting. I knew in my mind yes, but kept saying no, and I was kind of saying no. And, Doug, if you've ever talked to him one-on-one, is kind of slick. He kind of slides you into something. He said, okay. He said, well, I don't really need you to do anything. I'm not going to ask you to teach Sunday school or anything like that. He said, but I got this youth group. He said, Chad Lovell's teaching. I don't need you to teach them, he said. And they were coming at that time for an activity, I think, before you. we were feeling pretty steady at that time, and he said, I just need you, Chad can't make it there by the time he told him to be there. So I just need you and Mary to just come and kind of sit with these kids. It was a trick, exactly. And I said, well, I can do that. I can just sit there and watch teenagers. It can't be that hard. So we did. We came, and at first it was kind of weird. We just kind of sat back in the corner. We just make sure nobody killed somebody else, and we were fine with that. And then kind of started talking to some of them. You know, some of them I'd known since they were little. Some of them I knew since they were born. We were talking. Was it last night? No, it wasn't last night. Friday night. I remember holding Stevie when she was a baby, and I remember Maggie when she was little. So I knew some of them. I remember Donnie when he was a little terror running around here. So I just kind of talked to some of them, and more I just kind of started meshing with them. And before I knew it, we weren't just coming and sitting with them until Chad got here, but we were sitting with them, and then we were in there on Wednesdays. And then before we knew it, you know, Chad was sick here, sick there, so I would teach. And like I said, Doug's a slick one, so before I knew it, we were kind of the assistant helpers. And Chad, one day, we were talking, and he said he felt like I was calling him to something. I thought, oh, here we go again. Like, don't even mention that, because, you know, you say it, and God's going to remember he called me to something. I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Poke me again. So Chad said he had decided to go to Clear Creek, and Doug asked me, you know, what my plans were, and I said, well, I'm happy right where I'm at. Don't really want to do anything else, you know, I'll just help from time to time. And he said, well, you know, I asked Chad who he thought would be a good leader, and he said, you. Thanks, Chad. But I felt God's calling. I thought, well, you know, I'm just sick of running from it, because anything that you put off, anything that is burdening you, it just seems like after time it just wears you down. So I just thought, you know, God, if this is really what you want me to do, then this is what I'm going to do. And I've been doing it ever since, and it's amazing, because you think by the world standards you're going to miss out on something. And it's just everything that God takes away, he replaces. And he replaces with something that at the time seems like you wouldn't enjoy at all, and it just becomes such a blessing to you. That's why I picked these verses, because there is a time and a purpose for everything. And it's God's time and God's purpose. It's not ours. And just because we think that we're not going to go along with God's plan doesn't mean that his plan isn't going to go ahead without you. It's just whether or not you get to be a part of it. I think it's neat as I watch all the trends and all the fads, especially with youth, you catch it more, cycle back around. All the stuff that was popular when I was a kid, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, that was popular when I was a kid comes back around, and some of them think it's brand new. You know, like Transformers, these movies are like, oh, they're so cool. I'm like, yeah, I remember playing with those when I was like 4 years old. They're like, no, this is a brand new movie. I'm like, yeah, sure, it's a brand new movie. Or G.I. Joe, the new movie that just came out. You know, I can remember reading the comic books and having hundreds of the action figures, and so everything cycles. And I'm waiting for one specific thing. I didn't do a lot of reading when I was a kid. It just didn't interest me. But there were a series of books that I read all the time, and they were I don't know if anybody remembers these. I don't know if anybody's in the same age bracket. They were, that's a bad thing. They were called Choose Your Own Adventure books. And the book might be like 200 pages, but you might read 15 of them. And it was a book, and you start out and you read. And my favorite one was something about a haunted house. And you'd go through and you'd get to a page, and it would say, this event happened. If you want to do this, you turn to page 84. If you want to do this, you turn to page whatever. And depending on the choices you made is how much of the book you read and how the book ended. And what I would always do is I would read them, and I would pick a choice, and you'd have like 4 or 5 different choices. Sometimes, depending on how you went, it would lead you down one path, sometimes it would lead you down another. Most of them had 2 different endings, some of them might have 3. But you know, some of them you'd fall off a cliff and die, some of them you'd make it safely out. But I would read it, and I would go through one way, and then I would start reading it over, and I'd pick every other choice that I hadn't picked before. And I think when I stopped reading them, I don't know if they started running out of money or what, but it seemed like no matter what choice you made, the book ended the same way. You know, and life is kind of like a choose your own adventure book. You know, God gives us free will, but he has a plan for our lives. And you get to a point where you get to make a choice. And depending on the choice you make, it's going to lead you one way, or it's going to lead you another. You might have another 500 pages of a book, you might have another 5. It just depends on the choices you make. And, you know, I thank God when I look back on it and think that the choice that I made when I decided that I wasn't going to be here wasn't the last choice. It wasn't the end of my story. It wasn't the